Let's bring in NBC's Julie Sirkin on Capitol Hill. Ashley Parker is a staff writer for The Atlantic and MSNBC political analyst. Doug Heye is a Republican strategist and former communications director for the RNC. Doug, I would say in an understatement, Susie Wiles has an unenviable job. When senators are hearing from unhappy constituents, they don't have any information to say, yes, but we've saved X amount of money, because some of the stuff that's been posted has turned out not to be true. How does Wiles convince them, or can she convince them, that they are not powerless in this? Or is the fact that they are?
Well, I think it comes mostly from Donald Trump. These senators need to hear directly from him so they can be bought into what he's doing. The challenge is, one, the uncertainty. People don't know what's being cut, and people are maybe losing their jobs or have gotten notice that they've been fired, but not actually fired. And then the firings themselves. There's a lot of changes in Washington that are going to happen over the next few years. But when you go back into states and congressional districts, things like cutting at the Veterans Affairs gets very unpopular very quickly. And I would tell folks in Washington, whether you're at think tanks or lobbying firms, if you know changes are going to happen, this is an opportunity for you to talk to clients about how to best protect what you're getting from the federal government, whether they're grants or appropriations or what have you, but also to propose your own. So, Arnold Ventures a couple weeks ago proposed, here are 10 ways we can cut. Here are 10 tax loopholes that we can close. It's a smarter way of doing things because we can't fix some of these things with a scalpel, and we shouldn't do it with a chainsaw. We need a good chef's knife right now in Washington, D.C.
But to his original point, Ashley, Senator Tillis says, it's problematic for cabinet secretaries to have someone pretending to be their boss. And at yesterday's cabinet meeting, they were put in the position of having to affirm that they approve of Elon Musk's work, although, they clapped for him. But what influence can Susie Wiles have if Musk is doing what Donald Trump wants him to do, and even has said he's doing a great job?
Well, first, that cabinet meeting you referenced, I think that moment was so telling because Elon Musk is saying, look, this isn't a performance review where we ask federal workers to send 5 bullet points. It's a pulse check, to make sure basically these people who say they're federal workers are showing up, can respond to an email, are not dead. But that's not what it is at all, because you had some of those members in the room who, when put on the spot, declined to stand up to Elon Musk, but who had very publicly told their employees, don't send this response. So you're getting incredibly conflicting messages of Elon saying, send this to prove you're alive in a sort of dismissive, snarky way, and then cabinet members and agency heads saying, don't send this. So it raises a lot of confusion for what is a federal employee to do. To answer your original question, what can Susie Wiles do? She is incredibly powerful. She's someone who understands the president, has a very strong relationship with him, has worked to have a relationship with Elon Musk. One of those things we know she said in that private meeting on the Hill before was, look, if there's a problem, you can come to me. But again, that's a sort of scalpel solution, right? As Doug was saying, that's having DOJ come in, break everything into shards, and then Susie Wiles saying, look, if there's a shard that's really important to you, come back to me and I'll get you some super glue and we'll work on it. It may work in the margins, but you're right in that that's not sort of an actual fix across the federal bureaucracy for this very confusing, complicated dynamic that we're seeing unfold.
And one of the things that they've been sort of touting, the Elon Musk, the president, is they want accountability. They want to know that taxpayer dollars are being spent well. Well, accountability can work two ways, right? So let's say if the intention is to make sure that people who don't exist, who never existed, or who are dead are getting federal paychecks, have we seen accountability? Are there numbers? Do we know that there's a problem with people who don't exist getting federal paychecks?
Well, again, one of the challenges is that what DOJ is saying, what Elon is saying, what President Trump is saying sounds incredibly appealing, right?
Yeah, commonsensical, right?
Cut the federal bureaucracy. There's too much bloat. There's waste. There's abuse. Just about everyone can potentially agree with that. The challenge, of course, is when you actually do it. There's no indication that they have sort of called from these agencies, these alleged thousands of dead people who continue to cut a government paycheck. And when they say, for instance, they go after the low-hanging fruit and they fire probationary employees that, again, common sense sounds like employees who are on probation, who have perhaps done something wrong. But when you report on it and peel back the curtain, most of the time, these quote unquote probationary employees may be people who have just gotten a promotion because they're such good employees, who have just moved their families to a different city or to a new agency because they were asked to do so, because their skill set was so valuable. So this is where we're seeing a talking point may poll well and sound good, but when the reality is someone who voted for Trump, works for the VA, suddenly gets laid off, which they find out when they can't log into their email and their paychecks stop coming, that's not particularly popular, even in a deep red district.
Yeah, Ashley, thank you for that. Okay, Julie, Republican senators met with Elon Musk today, and House Speaker Mike Johnson says he's trying to schedule a meeting where Musk can talk directly to House Republicans. Tell us more about all of that.
Well, just walking to get to this camera, I stopped a handful of senators from different states, North Dakota, Texas, Florida. All of them have heard from constituents, whether it's pertaining to cuts to the VA or other agencies, or concerned about this chainsaw approach that Musk is taking, particularly in the conversation and context of what we were talking about with these budget resolutions and the savings they need to come up with without getting into those entitlements. There are definitely concerns because constituents are calling them. I don't have to tell you about what we've seen with those House members last week and their town halls back home. But I thought it was interesting what Ashley was just saying, because we had this reporting, too, that Susie Wiles in that meeting with Republicans told senators, you can call me if you're hearing from folks and you have a problem with how these cuts are taking place. In the same vein, you heard from Rick Scott a couple of minutes ago, coming back from the White House and his meeting with Elon Musk, saying that Musk and his team gave them phone numbers of people that he's hired at Doge that they can contact if they have problems. So is it Wiles? Is it Musk? Who is running the show here? I think that is one of the problems that, of course, Republicans have here on Capitol Hill. All being said, though, senators who came back from that meeting today in the Doge caucus said it went amazing. They're thrilled with these cuts. On the other side here in the House, you have Speaker Johnson, who says he, too, wants to organize a similar meeting from members. Take a listen.
We're talking about a meeting, bringing Elon back over to meet with either small groups of members, appropriators, or maybe all the House Republicans. We're trying to figure out logistics, but he's anxious to share what he's finding, and a lot of the things he's told me in our private meetings, I said, we have to make sure all the members understand the degree of the fraud, waste, and abuse and how egregious it is.
Between November and Inauguration Day in January, Elon Musk was no stranger on Capitol Hill, right? He was holding meetings with Republicans in the Senate, in the House, talking through his plans. I think he might have gotten ahead of himself in terms of how much he is cutting and where, because as you heard from Tommy Tuberville, the senator from Alabama, he told me yesterday that he wants a scoreboard of where these cuts are coming from, no matter how conservative you are and how much you appreciate the effort to cut the deficit. Members of Congress want to be in control of this process because this is, in theory, something only they can control. They're just figuring out how to work hand in glove with Elon Musk to do it.
Yeah, complicated stuff, Doug, and far larger staff cuts are expected to be in the pipeline. I mean, the New York Times is reporting on a memo from the head of the White House Budget Office, which, quote, called for agencies to be drastically cut, in some instances, to the fullest extent allowed by the law. One line in the memo said agencies should focus on the maximum elimination of functions that are not statutorily mandated. Here's the problem, and it's a human nature it's NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. Yes, everyone can agree that there is waste. Everyone can agree there is bloat. But if it's my constituent, if it's in my backyard, well, that's where I draw the line. So how do you move forward with this in a way that actually does make sense and that the American people can understand?
Yeah, Chris, the first time I heard the term waste, fraud, and abuse was at a committee meeting, House Committee Communications Directors, when the House Budget Committee Communications Director talked about eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. It was a guy named Sean Spicer. I think we all know who he is. And the reality is we can and should eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. And we'll see Republicans hold up very specific examples of spending of $1 million here, $5 million there that sound and are outlandish and should be eliminated. The challenge is that doesn't get us there. And when you start cutting meat at the bones, to your point, This is where Republicans are going to hear from members of their constituency, whether in congressional districts or states. Governors are going to hear this as well, not necessarily in the uncertainty of these weeks where we are right now, but the slow burn if people lose their jobs and the funding that comes from that. 3 months, 6 months down the line. That's where, if I'm a Republican, electorally, I'm looking at what we see in the coming months, not necessarily in the next few days.
Yeah, and there's interesting reporting on how many Democratic governors and even Glenn Youngkin in Virginia are hiring some of these federal workers or making plans to hire them because they have institutional knowledge. They know how government works. We shall see. Julie Sirkin, Doug Heye, thank you both.